Hello again. This is the third chapter of cardiovascular system. We already described the blood, which is the fluid component. Last chapter we described the pump, which is the heart. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the blood vessels. And we have three types of blood vessels. This is not new for you. We have one type of blood vessels that are moving away from your heart. Okay, they start in right here in any of the ventricle, in the right or in the left ventricle, and they move away from the heart. It doesn't matter if it's carrying oxygenated or deoxygenated blood. It's only carrying blood away from the heart. That's what defines an artery. The arteries on the pulmonary circuit, they carry actually deoxygenated blood. The arteries of the systemic circuit, they carry deoxygenated blood. Now, these arteries in any of the system, they're going to branch repeatedly several times and branch again until they form little arteries that we're going to describe in a little while. And smaller arteries, okay? And the thing is that now we need to collect all of that blood and bring it back to the heart. If it's coming from the pulmonary circuit, to get that oxygenated blood back to the heart into the left atrium. If it's coming from the systemic circuit, we're bringing deoxygenated blood back to the heart into the right atrium. Now, these blood vessels are moving the blood, oxygenated or deoxygenated blood, into the heart. They're going toward the heart. We call them veins. Okay? So, what is an artery? What is a vein? You define them depending on the direction of the blood flow. Arteries go away from the heart. Veins, they're directed toward the heart. Now, arteries then diverge, they branch. When we're forming veins, we fuse or we merge several veins, we converge those veins to form bigger veins that are going to empty the blood into the atrium or atria of the heart. Now, in between these two, the arteries and veins, we have a third type of blood vessel that is called capillaries. Okay, so this is one, this is two. Capillaries is the third type of blood vessels, and those are the smallest one. They consist, we will see, in a single layer of cells, and this is where actually the gas exchange occurs between the gas exchange, oxygen and CO2 exchange between the tissue and the blood. Now, another way to see that the arteries are going, in here we have the heart, they're moving away from the heart, they branch, forming smaller arteries, and in here we have even smaller size arteries. As you can see, we have the capillaries right in between the smallest arteries and the smallest veins, and the veins, this is the direction, they fuse together to form bigger and bigger veins, see? Until we form the veins that we know that empty in the right atrium, the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, and the coronary sinus. And the left atrium, the four pulmonary veins. Got it? Now, each of these blood vessels, specifically, well, let's describe all of them. These blood vessels have layers, okay? And in here we can see a cross section of an artery, because they put it red, so it's an artery of the systemic circuit, and this is a vein in the systemic circuit. Now, all of these space here in between, or the inner opening in there, we call it lumen of the artery, lumen of the vein. That's the opening where the blood is flowing, okay? So we have in the wall of that artery, of that vein, we have three layers. We have the tunica intima or interna, okay? It's called intima too. That is intimate contact with the blood. There is flowing in here. This tunica intima consists of, what do you think? It's a type of an epithelium that consists on simple squamous epithelium. So that is your endothelium, okay? Now, superficial to that endothelium, we're going to find a layer of muscle. Muscle, if this muscle is not in the heart, it's not cardiac muscle tissue, it's not attached to skin or bones, so this is smooth muscle tissue. Okay, so this layer in here, all of this is a smooth muscle tissue. As you can see, the smooth muscle tissue layer is thicker in arteries than in veins. This layer of muscle tissue is innervated by the nervous system. Which part? Somatic or visceral or autonomic? Smooth muscle tissue is innervated by the autonomic nervous system, especially sympathetic. Sympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic nervous system can stimulate this muscle to contract, and when it contracts, imagine that the muscle, this is the diameter of the artery. So when it contracts this way, so it reduces the diameter of the blood vessel, increasing the blood pressure, one of the effects of the sympathetic stimulation. The relaxation just relaxes the muscle, the smooth muscle. The blood vessel vasodilates, relaxes, opens up, and we decrease the pressure, the blood pressure in that way. Now, external to that, let's put it in green, external to that layer, we have a third layer that we call tunica externa, which consists of areolar connective tissue. Okay, so this is all connective tissue. And the importance is, well, it protects, it gives some support and protection to the blood vessel, but it also anchors these blood vessels to the organ that is supplying. For example, imagine again the chicken, when you're dissecting, when you're cleaning a chicken, a raw chicken, and you see some blood vessels, a little bit of connective tissue surrounding, and that attaches the blood vessel to or anchors that blood vessel to the surface of the muscle, let's say. That's one of the functions of this tunica externa. Now, this tunica externa has, if you see closely, it has blood vessels. Of course, these are structures that, like any other anatomical structure, we need to supply it with blood, right? So in that layer, where's my blue here? In that layer, in the tunica externa, we're going to find the blood vessels of the blood vessels. And they are called vasa vasorum. Vasa vasorum. Let's see if we have that name in here. No, we don't. So I'm going to write it here for you. Vasa vasorum. So are the blood vessels of the blood vessels. The blood vessels supplying oxygen, oxygenated blood, to, especially to the outermost or the most superficial layers of the blood vessels, because the tunica intima and maybe the inner portion or the deeper portion of the tunica media is supplied by with oxygen by diffusion of the oxygen content in the blood. There is flowing in there. Okay, so these three layers, the tunica intima, the tunica media, the tunica externa, are the same with, of course, we have the three layers in the arteries and in veins. What changes is the proportion. Usually arteries have a thicker tunica media compared to the veins, and veins have a thicker tunica externa compared to those on the arteries. Another difference is that the lumen of the arteries are round and the lumen of a vein are usually oval or flattened. It's like that. Um, and is a translation of the pressure in each of these veins, in each of these blood vessels. Now, the structure of the capillaries is even simpler. They only have tunica interna. That's it. They just have the endothelium with a basement, uh, membrane basement. And why? Because remember, right here in the capillary is where that's an ugly squamous epithelia, but you have to understand that in here, the less or the thinner this wall is, the better for the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, okay, in either direction. So we need this wall to be as thin as possible, and as thin as possible is just one layer of cells, which is your endothelium, squamous, simple endothelium. Now, well, in here, this is another, let me go back so I can erase that. Okay, in here we can see maybe a better picture where we can visualize these layers, okay? This is your simple squamous epithelium. This is the endothelium of the blood vessels. This is the tunica media, which is innervated by the sympathetic nervous system, the smooth muscle tissue, and well, all of this is lamina propria. This is the smooth muscle tissue. And this outermost layer is the tunica externa, and these are the vasa vasorum. Here is the term, vasa vasorum. There's more layers in between these layers, but we're not going there. Just know that we have the tunica intima, the media, and the externa. Now, what are the types of blood vessels? Remember that we said that we have three types of blood vessels. We have the arteries, they're moving away from the heart. We have the veins, they're moving toward the heart. And in between, we have the capillaries. Now, the arteries, they branch as they coming out from the heart, they branch into smaller branches or divisions. The first one, they're called large, or you're going to find several names depending on the source that you are reading from. But we have large elastic arteries. They're called conducting arteries too. And are especially the pulmonary trunk, the aorta, which are big, well, like this, big luminal arteries. The wall of, or the layer of the tunica externa is very thick, and we need it to be that thick because in here in the connective tissue of the tunica externa, we have collagen fibers, but we have also elastic fibers. And these elastic fibers, remember that they can stretch and recoil. Since these arteries are so close to the heart, every time the heart contracts and pushes or pumps the blood toward these blood vessels, these type of arteries can stretch to accommodate the pressure, right, of that heartbeat. And when the cardiac muscle relaxes during diastole, these arteries recoil, or the elastic fibers and the tunica externa of the elastic arteries recoil to, dampen those surges in blood pressure in these blood vessels. Look, after that, these elastic arteries, they branch repeatedly until we have a medium-sized artery that we call muscular arteries. Muscular because they now have a thicker layer of smooth muscle tissue. So this one we can control. These are mostly the arteries that we're going to describe later that supply the organs and the muscles. and they receive specific names depending on the region that we're talking about, the anatomical region. Now, the diameter, remember, of these muscular arteries is controlled by the autonomic nervous system to adapt to the demands of the body. We'll see a little bit more of that in a little while. And then the arterioles, which are branches of the muscular arteries, they're even smaller. They have the endothelium, maybe one or two layers of smooth muscle tissue, and a thin layer of tunica externa. Following that, remember that we have the capillaries. Okay, so the blood flowing. Remember, this is like it is a closed system. Okay, so the same amount of blood that started right here is going to flow through several elastic arteries, then several muscular arteries, millions of arterioles. These arterioles feed, okay, or branch and form this capillary bed. The capillary, look how it looks like. Isn't that cute? This is one single capillary. How wide these capillaries are? Only the diameter of a red blood cell. You cannot fit two red blood cells once on next to the other one. They have to be in a file. If a red blood cell measures, if I think is 7 to 8 micrometers in diameter, the diameter of a capillary must be around 8 to 10 maybe micrometers. Just that one red blood cell can go at a time. I mean, in a single line. Okay, again, remember the wall of the capillaries is only formed by one layer of cells, and that cell is flat. Okay, to facilitate the exchange, if this one is oxygenated blood, is going to give up the oxygen to this tissue, and the CO2 present in this tissue is going to be picked up by that red blood cell, and then we continue to deliver that deoxygenated or oxygenated blood, depending on the location of that capillary bed, into the veins. Now, capillaries we have like 3 types of capillaries depending on how tight the cells, remember this one layer of cells, so how tight or how close together these cells are. So the closest that is just we have tight junctions in keeping together, holding the different endothelial cells, form continuous capillaries. So their capillaries, they are not that permeable. They don't allow too much the exchange of big particles or big nutrients. No proteins can fit through these intercellular connections. So just fluids, small ions, and of course gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide. These capillaries are very common in the central nervous system and form the blood-brain barrier that I think we talk about. Now I'm trying to remember, I don't know if I mentioned. This is a barrier between these capillaries. They're bringing blood from the general circulation, but you don't want everything that is flowing in your general circulation reach the central nervous system. No bacteria, no waste products, nothing of that can reach the central nervous system. So that's why the capillaries in there are like that. Only gases can diffuse in here. That is why it's so tricky to deliver medications or anything that we want to deliver into the central nervous system. Usually anesthetics are in the shape or delivered as gases, so they can diffuse through these walls, or they have to be liposoluble, so they can diffuse through the lipo or the lipid-rich membrane, cell membrane of these cells. Now, the Other type of capillaries, they have like these openings, these pores, and we call them fenestrated capillaries. Of course, they allow to exchange more solutes, and they are very common in that. For example, a good example is in the intestinal epithelium, where we need to exchange all the nutrients that we're ingesting, absorb these nutrients and bring them into the general circulation. And the third type of capillaries are called discontinuous, or in your book they call them, well, no, they are sinusoids. Not that they call it, they are sinusoids. And these are leaky capillaries. As you can see, look at the junction, compare the junction between these cells and compare the junction between these cells. Very wide, okay? And of course, they're leaky. They allowed almost everything. Proteins, which are the biggest of the particles that can cross this wall, they can do it through the sinusoid. Very common in the liver, spleen, and bone marrow. Now, let's see, we have been described. Here's the heart. Yes, I put it here. Okay, and this is an artery, an arteriole that it just branch, okay, and it's delivering the blood into this capillary bed. So if I'm in resting conditions like that, like I am right now, for example, in my quadriceps, I am sitting here just teaching this class in here. So the capillary bed in my quadricep muscle is like that now. We have some ribbons of smooth muscle tissue that forms sphincters or valves that regulate, or they can close and open the flow of blood towards these capillary beds depending on the demands of the body. So, for example, right now, as I'm telling you, my quadricep muscle is in resting condition, so the blood is flowing through through an arteriole directly into a venule to form bigger veins, and eventually I'm going to empty that into the heart. But if I now start, while I'm teaching the class, I'm start doing squats and lunges, the demand of oxygen in my quadricep muscle is going to increase. So in that moment, that ribbon of smooth muscle tissue, this sphincter, can relax and opens the passage of blood now to this capillary bed, increasing the blood flow through the muscle. Now I'm not bypassing this capillary bed. I'm delivering more blood into the muscle. And this is true for muscles and for other organs, the skin, and depending on the external condition or just the demands of the body, we can control that. It's so cool, autonomic nervous system. Now, let's remember that capillary beds are present in most of our organs, and here's where again the gas exchange occurs. But there are some tissues that lack this. They do not have capillaries. And let's remember, we mentioned this at the beginning of the course, but let's remember epithelia and cartilage do not have capillaries. So they receive their nutrients and oxygen through diffusion from blood vessels located in another underlying connective tissue. Cornea, lens, parts of the eyes do not have capillaries. And tendons and ligaments, they have a very poor, they're poorly vascularized, meaning that they have a poor amount or a low amount of capillary beds. After we exchange the gases here in the capillary beds, we're going back to the heart. If this capillary bed was in the lungs, well, I'm returning oxygenated blood to the left atrium. If these capillary beds are found in any of the organs in the different from the heart, from the lungs, they're going to return deoxygenated blood to the right atrium. So this blood, oxygenated or deoxygenated, are going to be emptied into a venule. The small venules fuse together, merge together to form medium-sized veins, and medium-sized veins merge together to form large veins, and the large veins that we have are the superior and inferior vena cava that opens into the right atrium. One more thing to describe in here is the medium-sized vein. They have valves, are like projections that are formed by simple squamous epithelia from the same tissue of the endothelium, and they project inside. Why do we have veins? Why do we have valves in veins and not in the arteries? Well, arteries is a system of high pressure, right? They are bringing the blood that is being pumped by the heart. Usually, not always, is pumped favored by gravity. When we are returning blood back to the heart, we are against, usually, of course, except in the head, but we are pumping, or not pumping because now we don't have a pump, okay, but we're trying to return all of this blood, against gravity. So there are two factors that help veins to do this, and so blood doesn't pull down and makes you swollen. One are valves that once a vein have moved up, or proximal to the heart, these valves avoid the backflow of blood toward distal areas. And the second factor that we have that act as a pump, like the heart will do, are the skeletal muscles, especially on the legs. As we walk, we are standing up, okay, or doing even minimal activities. The contraction of the skeletal muscle helps squeeze up that blood up to the limbs, or if this is the leg, toward the thigh, and then to larger veins to be emptied into the superior and inferior vena cava. Okay, so let's stop in here to describe in the next video I think we're going already to describe the arteries and veins, the blood vessels of the pulmonary circulation. So, parenthesis, what we discovered or what we described in here, we described the definition of the different type of blood vessels. We described them, the different type of blood vessels, the directions, and the composition of the wall, the layers of these blood vessels. So see you in the next video.